Vancouver Urban Winery tonight for allowing us to host this event here. Thank you very much. And their wine. Thanks to Jeff Peters, who's filming tonight's talks. So let's just go on to the Q&A. So any first question, anybody?
Yeah, I'd like to ask David Schofield how he did the Cabernet Franc for Owen. Like, there's a great Cabernet Franc that they did for Owen Knowles for Sommelier at West.
And it's so beautifully done. It's so balanced and low alcohol. It shows the beautiful terroir. Can you comment about the Owen Cabernet Franc?
Thank you. Thank you, Sid. It's partly a very good vineyard. It's partly, it's just partly sensible winemaking. So, you know, we talk. The wonderful thing about Cabernet Franc is that in Bordeaux, where it originates, it's always third or fourth in the hierarchy. And something happens in BC that's very special. And you know, we didn't realize what it is at first. And what's interesting is that obviously Cabernet Sauvignon is a late ripener and struggles to ripen in the wine. But also, Cabernet Sauvignon loves gray skies. Everywhere that it excels, in Bordeaux, in Napa, in Coonawarra, it's places where it's cloudy or foggy most of the time. And Cabernet Franc loves clear skies, and that's one of the reasons that it excels in the Okanagan. It's very exciting that the point about Okanagan Cabernet Franc is not about the Cabernet Franc, it's about the transition that happens when you put Cabernet Franc in conditions that are right for it. So what happens? You get less of the stringy, sharp, tart greenness, less of the bitterness, more fullness, more roundness, and juiciness. But you know, Okanagan red wine, when it is at its best, will be juicy, fresh, vibrant, and lively in relation to any other red wine. And the Cabernet Franc, Owen Cabernet Franc is an example of that. A wine that's about the environment as much as great.
Any questions? Somebody's got one, I think. Carl.
So we were talking about Syrah in BC, and I do really like BC Syrah, but there was also discussion or some articles earlier about the types of the clones that I can hear not surviving very well. So should we be buying a lot of the current BC Syrahs and storing it away because maybe the next generation of Syrah is not going to be the same as what we have now?
Anybody else?
Don't like to hog the mic, but it's not the clones, it's the farming practices. And it's a big story, it's a hairy story, and it's conventional farming practices aren't good anyway. But in the extreme conditions in the Okanagan, they're disastrous. They're disastrous in the short term, and they're disastrous in the long term. And what happens is that, you know, at first it was thought, oh wow, this is amazing. Newly planted vines are really expressive in the Okanagan. They're really expressive because of all the synthetic nitrogen that's being poured on them. They're expressive for a bit. They're good in the third leaf. 5th, 6th, 7th, something happens. And by the 10th or 12th or 13th vintage, 12th or 13th vintage, those vineyards are dying. And it's not because of the clone, it's because they've been killed by conventional farming practices, which is artificial. What happens with natural farming and organic viticulture is it takes longer, much longer, for the vines to establish themselves. But when they do establish themselves, they're in balance. they're in tune with their environment, they A, survive, and B, thrive.
Not necessarily about farming practices, but this is about vision and going back into the BC, some of the BC Liquor Review. And I remember just reading again some of the submissions from the local associations and their lack, I think the lack of vision. And there was nothing about trade junkets going to getting groups of people together to learn the farming practices, what they do, say in France, where Syrah's from. I remember speaking to one winemaker here, who will remain nameless, and I said, you know, you really should start looking at biodynamic or organic farming, get rid of your tractor. I was telling him about Poney Canet, and they're using horse and plows. He looked at me like I had horns growing out of my head. Several years ago, I ran into Philippe Armenier, whose family owned Domaine de Marcoux in Chateauneuf-du-Pape. I think he got 100 points in one of his wines. Anyway, he got tired of France, went to Australia, learned English, met him in California, and he's a biodynamic consultant. He works with Christophe Baron and Cayuse and Vietter and Beaufrere. And we talked about doing a biodynamic seminar in the Okanagan, and I put the word out with some of my friends, not one taker. We have a long way to go in the Okanagan with our farming practices. If you think, Tim mentioned it, alluded to this earlier, the catalyst was 1988, the Gatton Free Trade. For those of you who lived in BC at the time, probably were listening to too many newspapers saying it's not good for BC. That was the catalyst of pulling out all the shit varieties that we had here that people were pawning off as, yeah, it's really good, but it's from BC. And putting in Vitis vinifera. 25 years in the wine business is a drop in the bucket. It's nothing. We need 50, 75, 80. And what are we doing as a province to ensure these farming practices, we have the coolest farming practices in the world, and what is, again, developing that wine culture, what are we doing as a government to ensure that happens? Yes, you can leave it up to the individuals, David, Chris Coletta, and some forward thinkers, but the people have to frickin' well realize these guys add a huge, immense amount of value to our economy, and they have to put it back into it through policies and intelligent thinking to take it for the next 100 years.
Any other questions? At once, going.
Come on, guys, let's go. We got some questions. We got to get into that.
It's great to hear you speak about biodynamic farming practices. I just wonder if you think for the future of BC wines, is it obviously going back to traditional methods of farming, or potentially more scientific methods of farming? I know in France they're reducing sulfites, a lot of wines going into guarantees. I don't know if you have a perspective on that.
What do you want to add for that? You don't need to answer it.
Everybody has to find their place in with their farming practices. Some people are biodynamic practitioners, yet sometimes when mold or mildew gets in and they're reluctant to use any copper, they lose a whole lot of their crop. In France, like Denis Bachelet's example, he calls it, gluten raisonné, so he uses organic methods, but within reason, he needs to save his crop. BC will never, this is what BC's got to figure out for themselves. BC will never be the low common denominator of wine in the wine world. As David alluded to earlier, the cost of land is high, cost of labor is high. So if we make a Zweigelt, it's got to be the fucking best Zweigelt we've ever had. We make a Pinot Gris like they have with their clone from Italy and working with Alberto Antonini, it's going to be the bloodiest, greatest Pinot Gris that you can get, like Iani up in northern Italy, which is about $45 a bottle. We can't get any because it's all sold out. You build it and they will come. But we have to do it right and we have to do it intelligently. So yes, I think organic and biodynamic, we have this great little microcosm in the Okanagan, and we need to really, really foster that and pique people's curiosity. Some people will never see the light either, never. That's just the nature of life.
I have a question for my learned peers. Sub-appellations, what are you hearing and what do you think about it? Is it going to happen and should it happen? David, I can see you chopping.
Has to happen. Yeah, and it will happen because it can, which actually relates to the question about biodynamics. You know, when the region in the world that has the highest percentage of biodynamic farms is Languedoc. And the reason that they have so much biodynamic farming, or organic and biodynamic, is that they can, because it's dry, because it's arid. They don't have problems with rot that are related to dampness. And in the Okanagan, we have the same good fortune. The conditions are right that they are in places like Chile and Patagonia and Mendoza in South America. We can be organic because we don't have problems with damp-related water conditions. It's great. There is incredible diversity. I mentioned this before. If you think about the Okanagan Valley, from Soyuz at the Washington border to Kelowna, or to Lake Country north of Kelowna, is a distance far greater than from Beaune in the center of Burgundy to Avignon. When you think of all the diverse growing conditions that exist in that distance, the same is true in the Okanagan. And we have the opportunity, if you think about, you know, just in big chunks, Similka meaning the Golden Mile in the South Okanagan, the Black Sage Bench. In between those two very well-known regions, the Golden Mile and the Black Sage Bench, is probably the best terroir in all of British Columbia. The middle bench, which isn't yet known, it needs to be, it can be, and when it is, it will be the key to the future of wine in BC, because we can't sell wine at the commodity level. We have to sell wine that has an added extra level of interest and value, and that can only come from place. Otherwise, it's just another Cabernet Franc or just another Syrah.
There's going to be some political issues, sub-outlet. So you're doing a program for BBC, like we did the grape for BBC.
We've got the second grape debate coming up on January 31st as part of planning, but it's just about whether the terroir or sense of place is more important, or the winery and the winemaker. But getting back to the subregions, we've been working on subregions for a long time, and it's a difficult problem because there's no funding for it, and it's being supervised by what's called the Wine Authority, who took over as sort of a higher body from the BC Wine Institute, who are just doing marketing now. The Wine Authority has a very limited budget, and so they've been saving up their money. They finally put up a website and a few things, but like they have no supervision as to what happens with grapes being moved, say, from region to sub-region. And so for a while, a few of us were trying to get, like, Naramata, who've done such a good job on their own marketing wines from Naramata as a sub-region, but there's so many grapes going in and out of there, there'd just be no way that people could say that those grapes came and were grown in Naramata. We've been working now in some of the smaller areas like Okanagan Falls and some of the areas where David is that might be a little bit more controllable, because subregions are everything as far as terroir and what happens, and it's very confusing for the public. Like you have Foxtrot 2005, wine that says that it's from Naramata, and then the next year they have it's from the Okanagan. It looks like they're not using grapes from the Naramata. It's very confusing for the public because there's no consistency of labeling and no way for people to know where the wine's coming from. So it's a disaster at the moment, but I think that we need to lobby the government to fund more money. The way they do it at the moment is that they fund it by the amount of crop that's is done, and so they get their money by the production of crop, and so it's very small crops in 11 and 12 and even 13, and so they get less and less money.
Yeah, too progressive.
Yeah, well, Sid, if they had a wine auction like they do in Hong Kong, the government there may support them, so that the state of New York would do wine auctions in New York. When New York realized that they make a ton of money in taxes on the wine auction, every single auction house went.
And Hong Kong, there's a really good interview with Peter Morel, who used to own Morel Wine Shop in New York, being interviewed on Fox, talking about Christmas wine. And about 8 minutes into the interview, the host asked him about, what about your wine auction? Why do we have it? And he said, the law changed. Simple. The law changed. He got into auction. Zacky's got into auction. Just get online and see the wine that's bought and sold on auction there. It's found revenue for the government. But by the way, you don't want the liquor board involved in it because they're going to mess it up. You want private individuals, whether it's my store, somebody else's store, handling that. You don't want the government involved. They'll collect their tax revenue, 10 or 11% tax. It's found money. It will bring people to the province. So
There's no initiative. I must have had at least 12 meetings with the liquor board over a series of about 8 years to try and get auctions going here 20 years ago. And in fact, the last couple I took this money with me and we tried to do that. There were so many hurdles and no initiative to do anything. And at one point they almost agreed that they would open up a separate store, and then rather than having wines put on sale in the stores, they would put them into the sales store, and then they would have auctions out of that store. But then some of the people who didn't want auctions started to say, well, what would happen of KV8 mTOR and buyer beware, what if there's a bad bottle and people couldn't return it, and on and on. And so we had discussions for probably 12 years to do that, because I had very good friends, both Syrah, and Michael Robb, and all these people. They were all prepared, they were all prepared to open here. But then Ontario talked about an auction, so I said, well, wait and see what Ontario does. Like, there's no initiative to make any change, and so it gets very frustrating, because that would have been so good. Look what Hong Kong has done with the change of their tax. Like, it's so good.
Right. Sid, we, Mark and I, when we did the press, our press 34 pages of major items, we did include wine auctions. It happened in the province, and there was interest. As soon as we said to them, think of tax dollars, and they kind of also thought, well, we don't have to run them, do we? No, you just need to collect taxes on the sales, you don't need to run them. And there seemed to be a lot more interest in having.
Well, you have to have some online presence, and when you have an online presence, you lose all your control. Like, you can't control it in BC if you have an online presence for an auction. So that's how somebody's blocked. Like, there's people in Hong Kong, people think all over the world. Like, imagine that happened in BC, where people are 50 years behind in BC. It's not likely.
How are they existing? So,
Anyway, any other questions?
but just think how much money soup could make if there were auctions.
So, Leanne, you had a question?
And doesn't have a question? Anybody else? Okay, thank you very much to all the speakers. Anybody got a group photo? We'll get up here real quick, so
David, 5 years
Again, thank you for everybody coming.